I can't stand still, so just to fair warn you. Also, ask any questions you want. I am a retired cop. I started my career in LA. I went to Costa Mesa. I retired out in the early 90s. Like most of you, there pretty much isn't anything you can say to me that's going to really hurt my feelings. So please ask, right? Even if it comes across course, I'll be fine with that. How's that? Okay, so I want to start off by first, you'll know on my notes here, I have my DoD disclaimer. Okay, I work for the federal government. I'm an employee of the federal government. Therefore, I have to disclaim that this is my opinion only. It doesn't reflect anything that the Department of Defense believes or the Department of the Navy believes, who are my current employers. On the far, let's see, for you, right side is a picture looking out the window of my office. So we overlook the ocean at Navy Postgraduate School. In fact, we own that entire side of the sand dunes, if any of you know what the Central Coast looks like. It's a pretty nice location. It's a nice, very nice federal facility. So today I want to just go over a little bit of the goals of my research, and this is in general, right, generically. The second thing is I'll give you a little idea of where my interests lie. In particular, in law enforcement. I do sit on the National Academy of Sciences Traffic Law Enforcement Committee. I have for 13 years now. And we are the kind of arm of NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. We are their kind of arm for research. And that's kind of our goals, is in the research and development side. And then we'll get into my presentation. I'll give you a little motivation behind it, focus on the questions, move through my measurement, which I think will probably raise a fair amount of discussion, and then results, and we'll conclude out. So, as a former practitioner, or now as an academic for the last 15 years, I kind of want to make sure that people understand where I'm coming from. So I believe that the goals of scientific research have three principles. The first one's description, the second one's prediction, and the third one, and probably the most important one, is explanation and understanding. And I'm going to hopefully convince you by my work that I believe in all three of those. And so my interests are pretty diverse. I am what was traditionally called a public policy analysis type guy who does financial management, and I've broadened my scope out to kind of a giant public policy, public admin type person. I pretty much do research that has interesting questions. It doesn't matter what it's in. It could be in healthcare, it can be in law enforcement, it can be in traffic law enforcement, it can be in taxes, it can be in revenue streams, it can be expenditures. It doesn't matter to me. I'm just interested in interesting research questions. So most of my interest is, and most of my publications are in the description of policy questions, explanations of those policies, and predictions of what those policies mean. I assume, unlike some of my colleagues, but I am a little different in that respect, I assume that policy and administration are linked through implementation. So that's my assumption. I'm not very good at the dichotomous type of the world. So if you guys in your studies have understood the dichotomy, I don't believe in the dichotomy. So that's where I have to kind of commit myself here. So I started this project about 14 years ago when I first started looking at traffic law enforcement. And I found out that traffic law enforcement data in particular is exceptionally difficult to get. And I thought, as a retired cop who had done both patrol and traffic, that data should be more accessible. And that's how I started. And then I got sidetracked doing some work on suspended and revoked licensing. Then I came back to traffic law enforcement. And I'm lucky in the respect that I do sit on a committee that generates some interesting ideas. And we have pushed forward with several states. You'll see one state today. This idea of grabbing data that is very specific at the citation level. And so my argument in this research is that most of the research, if you look at economics and you look at public policy, is very much an assumption that citation writing, what officers do out in the field, right, is acting as the agent for the government, and that our interest is in writing tickets and getting paid for those tickets. So a revenue Leviathan type argument where the idea behind a citation is to draw out money and enhance one's budget. William Muscannon, Bill, who I know, right, kind of follows that premise, okay, where the action of the agent, the police, is to enhance the revenue of the local government. I come from a policing background that I never recall ever doing that or coming into some quota process, so I assume that can't be true, right? And so what I want to do is I want to measure that and see whether or not there are other things that affect the role of the number of citations beyond just simply it's in a budget enhancer or a revenue function. So my objective here is to advance our understanding of things that affect citations. Any questions? No. You guys going to be quiet audience. So this is my big research question. So this research is focused on why are traffic citations written. I'm sure we can think of quite a few reasons, right? I hope one of those is because there's this thing called traffic safety, and the objective of writing a citation is to enhance that safety, right? That's one reason. There's other reasons. This political push argument put forward that this is a quota system. So I'm going to write citations up to a certain quota because politically this is what they want done. Then the third one is that this enhances government finance, right? It's a revenue stream. And then there's also a job performance argument here, right? In order to promote in any system, no matter what sector you're in, right, you have to be pretty good at what you do. You advance yourself up by doing things that advance you. One of them may be writing more cites or getting more arrests or a laundry list of reasons under law enforcement, right? So this could just be natural job performance, right? I would like to advance my career, therefore I go out and I work hard, I get a lot of citations and I get a lot of arrests, and therefore I advance myself. And then the last one is the hardest one, I think. So this idea that the community conditions affect law enforcement is definitely a hard task here. What about the community drives citations, right? And this becomes a problem with, the traditional measures of causation and really the measures of effects, right? Because really we don't really know what causes human behavior. We can find things that affect the outcomes, but the causation link is always a little weak. And so I would like to address this big question. This is not realistic, right? Why are traffic citations written have all kinds of confounding factors. So to make it more manageable, research likes to bring things down, right? Take the research question, come down to something that's more manageable. And here, I'm hoping I'm on right track by asking a what question, not a why question, and what influences the number of citations. That's my objective. And so I would like to remind you that this is in its infancy, right? This is, although, God, he just told us he's been doing this for 14 years. This is in its infancy, okay? There's very little work in the system done in this line. It's very young. It's just now becoming microdata applicable because of the changes in technology over the last decade plus. Okay, so very young. Feel free to ask any question you want, and I'll answer to the best of my ability. So I'm going to propose the following, that the number of citations are a function of the local economic condition, local wealth, community environment and condition, right? The local politics that underpin local finance, whether or not there's this tendency to cite out-of-staters more than there are locals, right? In other words, export the tax, called the citation, right? This kind of quota idea, which, by the way, just to let you guys feel relief, doesn't hold at all. There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever in any of the information that we've done so far that there's a quota. And then the last one is safety concerns, right? I write a cite. When I write that ticket, right, I have a choice first when I make the car stop. I stop the vehicle. I stop it for probable cause. Let's say it's unregistered. I make a decision if I'm going to cite the vehicle, driver of the vehicle in this case, right? And that decision that I make is a choice, right? Do I think the deterrent effect of me stopping the car, red and blue lights flashing, is enough so that everyone that drove by him won't behave this way? Or do I need to write the citation as a way to get them to comply with what we would term antisocial behavior, that is not paying your registration fee? Okay. And then there's some order to this, right? So there's some logical order that we want in law enforcement, and in particular in traffic, so that highway safety issues become important, right? We would like to reduce the number of collisions, whether they be injury, property, or fatal, right? We want those kind of things. And so our job, in essence, is to affect that, and we affect that through the citations. That's the argument. You don't have to buy onto it, but that's my argument. So I have to make a couple assumptions here, and one of them is really important. So the first one is, let's assume that primary function of the police are law enforcement, order maintenance, and service delivery. I don't think we're making a huge leap here. This is kind of what government does, right? So I don't think I'm making a big jump. The second one, I might be making a bigger jump, right? So citations, non-custodial arrest, right? Cite and release. Okay. It will increase, the objective of it is to increase my monitoring of the behavior of my citizens. So when I hand out the citation, I'm in essence monitoring the behavior of the citizen pool that I'm dealing with, right? So I want to increase that monitoring because that's part of my job, right? Monitor antisocial behavior, and then it should minimize, right? Whether it's just on the car stop and the fancy red lights and blue lights flashing, or the citation action itself, okay, it should reduce or minimize the probability that you'll keep acting antisocially. In other words, transgression. So that's my assumption. That's a pretty big leap. There's probably some sociology literature that doesn't agree with my leap, but that's my leap here. So that's an assumption. The last assumption isn't as important, but I think is important to put forward. And that is, I assume that overlapping or intra-county policing, so in my situation, we have a county within a state, we have cities within the county, okay, that they're complements to each other. In other words, a county enforcement action is not a substitute for a city enforcement action. or a state enforcement action is not a substitute for a county enforcement action. It's not a very big or powerful assumption, but is one that needs to be noted. So I have 3 hypotheses, because I'm a researcher and you got to have hypotheses. Originally I didn't have them in the slide pack, and then I thought, oh, okay, yeah, I got to do it. Right? It's the rules. Right? So the first one is that local household income, right, wealth, affects the number of citations. So what would you guys guess the outcome would be? Would you guess that the wealthier, the more cites, or the wealthier, the less cites?
The wealthier, the less.
So wealthier, the less, wealthier, the more.
I think more just because there's more access to cars. People are actually driving and not taking public transportation.
Okay, so one of it is there's actually more cars on the roadway, therefore the higher the probability that there'll be some form of an infraction, right? And the other one is, no, wealthy communities they don't write tickets to because they don't need the money, right? Because they've already provided you a nice large tax base. Why would you need the money, right? So either way here, I don't want to go directional, right? I just want to put there's an effect, right? The second one is violent crime. This is straight from sociology. Will have an effect on the number of cites. So here, my argument, the higher the crime rate, violent crime here I have as part 1 for all the cops in the world, in the audience. So part 1 crimes will change or affect the number of cites. So there's a kind of a logical argument in sociology that says the higher the crime rate, the higher the citation rate, because criminals misbehave whether they're in a car or not. That's one argument, right? There's another argument that says, well, as the violent crime rate goes up, law enforcement's time gets consumed, and therefore law enforcement spends most of its time on patrol functions, not traffic functions. Right? So it could go either way. Right? And then the last one is criminal citations. What's a criminal citation? I had to look it up myself. Okay, it's misdemeanors. DUI, reckless, right? Evading arrest. Criminal citation because it's a cite and release on a misdemeanor, right? The action is a misdemeanor, not an infraction, is the argument in the literature, whether or not it's true or not. So I say here that the higher DUIs, reckless, evading arrest, hit and run, right? The higher that, that'll affect the number of citations written. So far, everyone's okay with this. We'll keep going. Okay, so I have information from all counties in the state of Florida. By the way, I have the state of Massachusetts, state of New York, one other state, and it's slipping my mind right now. I have 4 states. The data's not very clean yet. This takes time, lots and lots of time to clean it up. So I'm going to focus here on just Florida. Okay, so I have data for a 4-year period, 11 through 14. I've used a whole bunch of databases to integrate here. So the first one is the Uniform Traffic Citation Statistics put out by the state. The state has an Office of Highway Safety. That Office of Highway Safety provides these statistics. The second one is out of the Economic and Demographics for the state. Behavioral risk factor surveillance is the health people finding out whether or not if you're an excessive or heavy drinker, right, how you behave. That's in essence what that surveillance one is. I have some populations, some statistics from the Wisconsin's Population Health Institute, which is kind of the giant umbrella of data here. Bureau of Labor, Community Survey, and other databases. So I've combined here, just for the state of Florida, a whole bunch of data. So my configuration here is important for those of you guys who are PhD students or students in general who get forced and tortured into statistics. This is the force and torture part. Okay. The configuration is a county-based panel over 4 years. Okay, it's only on movers. So all moving violations, running red light, running stop sign, excessive speed, so on and so forth. Okay, movers. I have to make some assumptions here, and the assumption is that the important variation is within the county, not between all the counties. So I'm going to use a fixed effects regression, right? It's important because most of my variables on the right-hand side meet this criteria. So I'm going to use this statistical thing, and I'm going to cluster all the errors on the county itself because I'm at county level information. So I'll give you an idea on the first set of observations. So what I did was I broke my data into 25th percentile, 50th percentile, and 75th percentile, and then I picked those counties that met that requirement. The first one up at the top is Bradford. It's a 25th percentile. It's a very small county. In fact, the scale here is from 0 citations up to 500, right? Sumter is the middle, the median, running from 0 to about 1,000, right? And then Manatee, one would call the monster, right? Although Miami-Dade, by the way, is the monster, right? Manatee is at the 75th percentile. It's running anywhere from 0 to 4,000 citations. Okay, this is the citation rate over time, and I've given you guys who wrote them. So Florida Highway Patrol, the cities. Now the cities here I just group all together. So this is city PD functions. And then the sheriff, the county side. Okay, so if you look at, my beautiful colors didn't work out too well from here at least. FHP obviously has different behavior according to where it is, but as you guys will see, the red one, which is the one with the most, is the sheriff. Right? And then if you go down, the green one's the city. All right, so in Sumter, the city PDs write the least over the time period. In Bradford, they write the most until 2012, and we see a drop. Then they come back up. In Manatee, they're right in the middle, dead center. Right, the low end here, the purplish color is Florida Highway Patrol within the county. So this is Florida Highway Patrol. Although they have a state job, they're writing the site within this county, within the boundary of the county. So these are all coterminous boundaries here. So this will give you an idea of kind of what the data spread looks like, right? So you can tell that there's going to be a lot of variation within the county, right, over time. And you can see it, right? It's pretty evident. To give you some idea of how the quota system goes away, this next slide kind of kills that idea, right? If there was a quota, what should one see over time? Positive slope, right? Well, you know, the city cops are writing a hell of a lot less, right? Now, the Florida Highway Patrol appears to be increasing, but if you take from 11 to 14, it's about flat. About 507,000, 529,000, it's about flat, right? And as you can tell, the sheriff is on the opposite slope, right? His negative also. So, if the quota hypothesis was even probable, these should all be positively sloped, or aggregated together positively sloped.
I didn't hear the ground rules, so I apologize.
No, ground rules are it's open.
What's happened to the number of uniformed officers over this time? Has it maintained, has it been flat, or has that decreased?
No, I've controlled for cops.
Okay.
Okay, I just kind of put them in there as a overall number. You know, it's really hard because some law enforcement has a separate traffic and patrol function, like the one I worked for. Some combine that function. Obviously, Florida Highway Patrol doesn't combine it, right? They're traffic cops, right? But so I have control for the cops in here. And even relative to holding the cops constant, this is the slopes you get. Yeah, which is pretty interesting, right, overall. Yeah.
Historical effects going on here, click it or kick
That's really hard in my data. Really hard. Because those are very agency specific. So agency 1 may do click it and ticket, but agency 2 doesn't within a county. I can try to partition that, but that's tough, Jim. That's tough. That's not very easy, right? Not that this was easy in itself, but it's still not very easy to kind of get the microdata pulled apart that far, right?
Did you go back qualitatively, like for that top line, what happened from 212 to 214?
Okay, so what happened?
That's like a 25% drop.
One argument would be the economy got better,
But didn't affect the other one.
but didn't affect the other ones. Yeah, so I don't know. Right, is really what it comes down to is what happened in 12 that was so interesting, or although city, local PDs were on their way down anyway from 11, right, to 12, and then they really start precipitously falling. One argument would be that the cops, the number of cops shrunk, and therefore you had less bodies out on the street writing citations. But I've controlled for that, and that's not what I find. The question is, should I control for that, or should I control for FTEs? Because a lot of PDs, and I can speak for Costa Mesa when I was there, in '89 we went from writing our own reports, so to speak, right? Taking cold calls, burg, theft, whatever it was. To that function we transferred over underneath the leadership we had at the time. We transferred that over to civilians. So we no longer took cold calls, right? So if you called us and said there was a crash that occurred on private property, we said call your insurance company.
Possibly there's a change in leadership.
Yeah, and this could be, right, that there's multiple effects going on simultaneously, and I have no capture for them of what's happening within the PDs. Now, are most of the law enforcement guys here, you guys from the North Carolina general area? So similar for your agencies? Have citations fallen, or citations flat, or citations, I guess you probably don't want to admit if they're on the upslope, right? But is this similar to North Carolina or different?
I think I'm a state trooper.
Okay.
We were pretty flat.
Okay.
But we've had a significant loss of manpower. So we still remain flat. So if you
Per person, it's up,
right.
but overall agency-wise, just flat as a pancake, right? So I've tried my best to control out the FTE side, but and I don't know that much about North Carolina. What's the drop-off on troopers? What's the reason?
We're probably statewide 200 short.
Okay, so it's just filling the billet, or is it the retirement bump, or what's affecting the count of troopers?
Recruitment is probably the issue with those right now.
Okay, so right now it's hard to go out and get a cop, right? Which lots of law enforcement agencies have found. We found that, to date myself, back in the 80s, early part of the 80s, we had that same problem in California where it was exceptionally difficult to go out and recruit because we had set the criteria so high that, pretty much the vast majority of the population couldn't make the criteria. And so we had to kind of bring that down in order to be able to have a reasonable pool to choose from. Okay, so here's my overall picture. I would argue that there's no quota here. I don't have a long enough panel to really be, making a major argument, but it appears that isn't going to hold too well for the quota system. So now this is an eye chart just to see whether or not you guys can see, right? I listed off as many control variables as I could. Okay. Some of them are going to go away immediately just due to the methodology. So whether or not there's a county manager form of government is a fixed outcome, right? It's either county manager or it's not, and it's going to go away in the data. Okay, but I've tried to control for things that I think are common as much as possible. So let's ignore the 3 independent ones, the ones that I care about, for a moment, and let's look at the controls. So I have the mortality rate, fatals per 100,000, population in the unincorporated area, children, seniors, right, common things. I did pick up all the demographics. For those of you who've read some of the literature in American Economic Review, none of those work. They all go away. Okay, whether I'm wrong, they're wrong, I got no idea. But the demographics don't work. In other words, they don't matter. The number of women doesn't make any difference on the number of citations. The binge drinking doesn't really work. The non-movers, parkers, right? In this case, these are parking tickets. They don't work too well either. The citation revenue, completely gone. So when you drill down and you capture the budgetary effect, it's like nothing. It's not only insignificant in a statistical sense, but economically it has no impact. And then I have workforce that drives a loan to work, and then the unemployment rate, and then there's a whole host of other ones. You guys are welcome to ask me, and I'll happily run out the genre list here for you. So the statistical effects that we find. Now, as a person trained in statistics, right, statistical effects are kind of a weird thing. Where do I cut the point at where it's important? So what I'm calling important, because my data set's pretty big, is something where my type 1 error rate is very, very small. So if it's a p-value, if I have 100,000 observations running in the data, then I'm looking for p-values, if you guys want to use the p-value, 0.001 or less. Okay, so the 0.05 kind of goes away. So it goes by how big the set is the way I normally do it. So I have statistical effect, what people would traditionally call a statistical effect here, for income, violent crime, and criminal citations. And here's my outcomes, the economic effect. So every $1,000 increase in median household income in the county increases citations by virtually 0. So I got great statistical effect, but I got nothing, right? Because who cares? I don't know about you, but going out 3 digits to find something is probably problematic, right? Because 1,000 is 3 digits out too, right? So in order to find the effect, the 1% effect you want, we got to change median income by 100 grand. We're not changing median income by 100 grand. Most of these counties don't have $100,000 median income. They're in the 30s and 40s, right? So we got nothing. So income, we got nothing. We have the increase, though. We have that positive sign, which sometimes makes people feel good, but we just don't have a lot here. The second one, an increase of 1 violent crime per 100,000 in the population reduces moving citations by about 0.04. So what do we have? We have the trade-off, right? Cops have 2 functions, patrol and traffic. They got to make choices. And as the violent crime rate rises, they write less cites, right? They got other things. You only got so many hours in the day, right? And then the last one is a 1% increase in the criminal cites, in other words, DUI, right? Reckless, evading, those kind of things, increases citations by about 0.33. Now here we actually have something, right? Kind of interesting. What's it saying? Well, statistically what we're saying is that as my criminal citations go up for DUI, reckless, evading, hit and run, right? So go my movers. They're going at 1/3 the rate, right? So this may increase by 1, this will increase by 1/3. But they are following that trend, right? Which kind of makes sense, right? law enforcement is out there to enforce and improve traffic safety. These are very serious citations, the criminal citations, DUI, reckless, and those kind of actions, hit and run, and therefore my regular movers are coming up with them. So it seems to me to be kind of a logical argument. Now, of course, I like this argument because of what I used to do for a living, right? And so, although I find statistical effects for income, and I do find it for unemployment, so as the unemployment rate rises, citations fall. Right? Kind of makes sense. They're less on the street, the whole laundry list, right? Drive less, not going to work, don't have a job, so on and so forth. There's no economic effect here. So I'm glad I got a slope coefficient that has, a statistical inference. Economically, there's nothing there. The second one is I got no support, right, in this database for this Leviathan argument that revenue is the reason cops write citations, right? I have no evidence of that. I tried it budgetarily. I tried it expenditure-wise. I tried including the court cost into the ticket, because in lots of jurisdictions, the city imposes a fine, $90, California. I impose a fine, I write you a cite for running a stop, it's $90. It's not $90. It's $189 because the court imposes 110% fee on top of that. Okay, so the $90 now becomes $189. Okay, I don't get the $189 as a city cop, and the city certainly doesn't get it. I get a proportion of the 90, which I share between the state and the county, and then I get whatever's left over. So budgetarily, the impact's very, very small, although most people think it's really big, right? I mean, I can speak for myself. I'm probably speaking for most cops. I've stopped people and wrote a ticket, and they told me they were paying for my salary. And I tried to explain to them nicely, no, you're not. But the people who own the property that we tax, they're paying for my salary. You're not, right? But there's this thought process that the citation comes to the cop, and that's the way we pay salaries. And unless there's some police department I'm unaware of, that's not the truth. The third one here is I have some evidence for a decrease in moving citations when violent crime rises. So I kind of like the idea that I found it. Two is, it's interesting after I control for everything that movers and violent crime are at least somewhat related, right? Kind of gives assurance that if we're writing tickets, we could be, in effect, controlling that violent crime rate. I'm not saying I can jump over joy and say, yeah, we have this, but it looks like this is an effect. And then there's evidence that supports traffic law enforcement response to increasing criminal citations by increasing movers, right? Which kind of makes sense to me. As misdemeanor type traffic violations occur, an increase, cops start writing more and more movers in a way to kind of control that. Yeah.
On that last point, trying to get my head around the criminal citations and the moving citations in terms of being distinct categories.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if your data controls for that. So if I'm speeding through a school zone, I get pulled or whatever,
Okay.
and I'm drunk, do I get a speeding ticket and a DUI? Do I get both of those at the same time?
I cannot tell you that my data separates those. That's why.
I'm speaking from experience.
From experience. No, you go for the DUI, right? You go for and if you get it reduced to wet reckless in court, okay, then maybe the speeder will come in, right? But in general, from my experience, I'm not going to speak for these guys' experience, but from my experience, the answer is the DUI. I could care less. The speeding gives me probable cause for the stop.
Just pile it all on.
Not usually. Not usually. I'm not saying it can't happen, but not usually. Not usually. And if you're speeding through a school zone, at which, and I can only speak for the state of California, you're 2.5 times the speed limit. which means you're running 2.5 times 25 miles per hour, okay, in a school zone, then that becomes a misdemeanor. I can't speak for other agencies, but that becomes a misdemeanor. And part of that is clearly a safety issue, right? Because you're not going to stop that car in time in the crosswalk. So in California, then that would fall here. In Florida, I don't know if it does. I haven't looked. But yes, they are distinct categories. And yes, I do have the ability, because of the wonderful people at the Office of Highway Safety, to give me the micro data so that I can separate everything out based on that citation. So the implications here, I think this is very early. I want to make no pronouncement that I've solved all the world's problems in traffic law enforcement. Okay, but I think I do have some interesting outcomes. I think that policing is a trade-off between crime reduction and citation issuance. I have always thought that. Part of that's my own natural bias as a former cop, right? And that I really think that most citations are written for traffic safety reasons. And that law enforcement, because of the freedom given to law enforcement on writing the citation, I do not have to write the cite, right? I can tell you as a cop from the 70s through the 90s, right? I never felt like compelled that I have to go out and write a cite. And the reason I have to write the cite is because you did something. That was my judgment. I took my judgment very serious. And I can personally attest I didn't write the ticket just because. Right? I wrote the ticket as I didn't think the deterrent effect of me pulling you over and all your neighbors going by me with those funny red and blue lights flashing, right? And everyone pointing fingers at you, right, as they're driving through the neighborhood. I didn't know if that was going to be as effective as me giving you a piece of paper that said a summons to appear in court and you getting your day in court, right? So that's just my personal bias on that end. And I should be close to my 35-ish minutes. And I was trying to leave time for questions because the subject matter kind of lends itself to questions sometimes, and it irritates most people that cops write citations. In fact, I have a student who's a wonderful, wonderful young man who told me that taking the class from Dr. Eger is like getting a citation from a cop. I don't like the idea I got a sign on the bottom line, right? So in other words, I don't like the idea that you're forcing me to advance my knowledge because it feels like I'm getting a ticket, right? And my response was, then I've done my job. Because you should feel like you're being educated, not that you're just sitting in the classroom. So from my point of view, that's perfect. I'll go with, you feel like you got a ticket when I grade something, right? I'm okay with that because I'm supposed to be advancing your knowledge. So any question, guys, feel free. Anything you want to know, I do other stuff in suspended, and I do lots and lots in tax, motor fuels tax in particular. I do lots of other stuff. So any questions you guys have, I'll happily answer.
On one of your early slides, you brought up the assumption people may have that out-of-staters or out-of-countyers even get more tickets. And Florida is an interesting potential state for this because of Disney World and all the other reasons
Sure.
to visit. So you had a list of controls. I was just curious if it just didn't come up as something that seemed to be driving citations, the amount of out-of-county or even out-of-state visitors that go through that area.
Right, and so yes, it is a control in there. So I do have whether or not the person's, mind you, driver's license was from the state of Florida or not. Okay, that doesn't necessarily mean they're an out-of-stater because lots of people forget that most states require within 30 days of you becoming a resident that you go and change your driver's license, but most people kind of push that, right? So I found nothing on that effect. And in Florida is a good example because you would expect an exportation of the tax, right? Because there's lots of vacationers that come through this state, right, for the sunshine. And I didn't find anything that we would call statistically important. There are some effects in a series of the controls that are definitely there. They're just so small By the time, kind of like the one I showed you with the 0.009, by the time you get to the economic effect, there's just almost nothing there. But yeah, I do have a series of controls sitting in there to try to get that capture. Other questions? So the cops have no questions other than I'm crazy? Yes?
I know you talked about the different agencies that contributed to your survey.
Mm-hmm.
What was the source? Was the source those agencies, or was it the local court records, or what was the source of your?
Okay, so the source of all the violation data I have, right, is the office in Florida. There's the Office of Safety, Highway Safety, and they're in essence the depository for the citations. I also have whether or not, I probably shouldn't tell you guys this, but I also have whether or not it was adjudicated. So, did it get dismissed or not? Right? So I do have that too from the court system because they feed in right off of that citation number. Right? And so my data is specifically for Florida from that office. They collect all data from Florida Highway Patrol, all the cities, and all the counties. So I get every single solitary citation, and you can run down them by numeric. It's quite interesting. Yeah.
Any type of participation then from those agencies?
They don't have a choice but to participate. I should put that a little different, right? The state of Florida requires that you, in essence, state your citations to the highway safety.
No, what I'm asking is any type of participation as it relates to those agencies with your research and your information or your inspection into.
Yeah, okay, so you want to know, did counties and locals and the state talk to me about it? Yes, the answer to that is yes. In particular, one of my former students is the former colonel for Florida Highway Patrol, which is their chief. And then I've done lots of work also. I have a database that's almost done for Georgia because I've done lots of work with Georgia cops. Part of that's my son's a cop in Georgia, right? But so I've done lots of work for them on looking at citations, but most of the time I look at suspended and revoked citations themselves, because cops in suspended and revoked, that kind of little narrow slot, cops sometimes are unsure of whether or not the suspension is for you didn't pay your parking tickets, or this is your 4th DUI and we suspended your driver's license, right? Because there's no indicator in the system on that part of it. And I've been working with AMVA, which is American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, to see if we can't come up with some different kind of license that says, here's a suspended license for somebody who's a highway safety issue, right? And here's a suspended license that is a legislative action. Okay, because, for instance, I don't know how many of you guys know, but Jersey will suspend your license for not paying your dog tags. I don't know about you, but that's kind of a weird way to take someone's license away. Dog tags. So that fee associated with that, right?
What about cats?
I think cats don't matter. But, so that part of it is kind of interesting. Yes?
Was the share of adjudicated increasing or decreasing over time?
I haven't gone that far. So I have the adjudication. So I have whether or not it was dismissed, how it was adjudicated, whether or not the fine was the total fine, or whether or not it was partial, and whether or not there was a payment system established to the fine. But I haven't tore that apart yet.
You could have a situation where you're writing more tickets, or you're writing less tickets but more adjudicated, so you're actually level on that, or am I wrong?
So you could have where the court system is throwing out all your cites. So I'm a county X. I write 50 citations. They all go to traffic court, and traffic court judge dismisses every one of them, right? Now, I think that's pretty rare, but it could happen. So what I was after in this research was the cops' action, not necessarily the court action with the law enforcement side. But I do have that micro data that drills down to know what the adjudication was. So the percent, and all that could be derived. But
And
I
the two wouldn't influence one another, so I might be more likely to write a ticket if the adjudication rate is high or low.
so if I have the court system working with me, I write more cites.
I'm not a cop.
It's a good question.
The cops know the judges, the adjudication rates may influence whether or not I write the ticket. If it's low, I may not write the ticket, right? Or if it's
So if I think it's going to get thrown out because I have a particular judge sitting on the bench, why write the cite?
right.
That's a possible confounder, right? Yeah, so I guess it is possible that I perceive the judicial system as something that's negative for my work behavior. Yeah, I mean, good idea. I'll try it, right? I got the data.
Wouldn't that only really be an issue if there was a quota system or if it affected them financially? Because otherwise, what would be their motivation?
Yeah.
In that, in saying, if it's going to get thrown out in court, what's their motivation in, continuing to do research?
Yeah, so the assumption would be the cop wants the deterrence effect anyway, right? So they're going to do the action regardless of what the court does, independent of the court. What he wanted to know is if they're correlated. Theoretically, I hope they're not, right? That would really burst my bubble, right? But I guess it could be that, like I can speak for Florida when I was at FSU 4 years back. They were throwing out all camera red light ticket citations. The argument put forth by the populace. It's not fair. My argument in testimony. What's not fair about it? Did you or did you not cross the stop bar and the light was red, the thing took a picture of you, and the driver's plate, the plate, which part of it's not fair? Their argument was no human interaction. And they had a judge who was pretty prone to that argument and said that's not really traffic law enforcement, that's a camera capturing an action that a cop may or may not have caught. Yeah, you can only argue with them for so long, but I just don't see what the problem is. Has the camera caught you? Don't do it again. But that's not necessarily the way. So a lot of those have gotten thrown out. Arizona had the same set of issues, but if I remember right, Arizona was using speed cameras to hit people on speed, which is kind of unique since all of Europe uses speed cameras and red light cameras because law enforcement is expensive. All these guys sitting in here, that's expensive. Back in the day, we were a couple $100 plus an hour to put a cop on the street.
Okay, Ron, I got kind of two questions.
Okay.
One in front and one in the back end, so I apologize for coming to mics. You may have talked to this already, but just curious about the impetus for the research, kind of what sparked your curiosity
Okay.
looking into this, and then on the other end, if you look empirically and you don't find support for this, this hypothesis, what are some of the potential positive implications of that?
Okay. So the first part of it is, the impetus is I sit on a law enforcement committee for the National Academy of Sciences, and we've been trying to promote law enforcement, in particular traffic law enforcement. In fact, we're having our meeting we're down south in California mid-June on traffic law enforcement, and we raise all kinds of research questions that we think are in the traffic law enforcement's purview. And that's part of the impetus, and I've been doing this for a long time with these guys. And it's always frustrating to me where, I try my best, and I know other researchers try their best to kind of control for everything one can, but sometimes that's not possible. And so maybe I have a positive aspect of cops because I was one, but I think cops do their job. And I think their job is a patrol function and writing citations, and I think that's their job. And we don't treat that as their performance metric. We treat that as somehow a punitive action, right? And that this is their performance metric, right? Writing citation and doing patrol functions. This is what they do, right? Just like any other employee. That's how they get promoted. That's how they do things. And then the second one is, I think I have some explanation on parts of why things don't work out statistically. I think some of it is I'm data restricted. I think that's the easy cop-out. I think some of it is that we don't have a very good capture on how a human behaves, right? We assume, right? And we put all these kind of crazy assumptions into it when truthfully, for me, you put on a blue suit, a tin badge, and throw a 40 auto on your hip, you're a cop. But you're still a person, right? And so you're still making decisions. I mean, the decisions these guys make that happen that quickly could be adjudicated for years. Okay, but they made that decision and we forget that part of it. So that's the impetus and my curiosity, and I think why some of these things that we assume should work out statistically or should show up in data don't, because these are human beings. And they don't behave necessarily what we would like them to do, rational at all point, right? There's the old adage, right? There is this thing called a law, right? For me, in my world, California Vehicle Code, there's the spirit of that law, right? And then there's the letter of that law. And I'm hoping I was not the letter of the law cop unless I had to be, right? I'm hoping I was the spirit of the law cop because I consider myself a human being and I like to behave what I would think appropriately, right? Under the situation where the person I made the car stop on is under duress, right? I mean, there's very few times I ever made a car stop with people laughing and happy that I made the car stop. I've never ever had anyone say, "Oh, thank you for stopping me. I knew I was speeding." This has never happened in my career, right? Not saying it couldn't happen, but it usually doesn't. And so I'm hoping that, you know, when I made that call at the door, usually, I made that call because I thought about what I wanted the action to be, and that I don't think we can model that behavior. That's, I guess, my overall thought process.
Just thinking about it, you know, so on the one hand, we do public opinion polls, and we look at the trust in different professions and whatnot. Law enforcement and police officers usually do pretty well on that. I mean, usually some of the highest in terms of public's trust and confidence in what they do. And then there's a disconnect on the other end with perpetuating a myth, if you will, that, well, they're just, my father used to refer to it as a revenue enhancement zone.
Yeah.
Speed trap, right? They're going to get you, and it's all about this and all that. But it's pervasive. Everybody kind of assumes that to be the case. And so there's a little bit of disconnect there. So, you know, I was getting, is this something that, you know, maybe helps increase legitimacy or support, or is there just so much distrust of government anyway that we're going to continue to, you know, have perpetuate these myths or these notions about what these guys are up to?
Well, I hope it reduces in the academic sense the initial bias, if you would, of these guys, the cop community, right, write tickets because, right, they're arms of government and government wants to take my money, right? I hope I put at least a little dent in that. And also that a lot of times law enforcement is not perceived as an employee. They're perceived as some kind of, you know, enforcer, right? And really, we also have to think about their job is just like anyone else's job. I mean, a junior professor would like to be an associate and get tenure, and that associate would like to be full, right, professorship. Well, how do we do that? Well, we have a kind of common set of rules in academia. We publish, we serve on committees, we do community service, we, in essence, advance our careers. Well, law enforcement, the advancement of their career is doing the actions that they've been told to do on the street, just like we're asked to publish. They're asked to do citations, patrol functions, take reports, and do safety stuff. And we don't seem to want to be okay with that. That's their job, right? And it really is just their job, just like it's my job to promote, myself up as high as I can go by doing the stuff that enhances my career so that I can be promoted up too. And I think we forget that a lot, right? And I feel for them. Part of it, I was one, and part of it is I really feel for them because the world is changing so fast. I am glad, I'll be honest. I am really glad you guys still do this. Thank you. I'm really glad I don't at this point. I really am. Because it's a tough job. And a lot of people just don't understand how tough that job is. And I feel for them in that respect. Yes?
I think you both are talking around a really important factor into what it would seem to be this particular topic. And I think all of us really appreciate the respect. But what did the police officers for these agencies say in response to your research or your questions or your hypothesis?
So far, I've never done anything in the law enforcement community to date that has not been well received by the community at large.
What I'm asking is, what did the police officers of these agencies say in response to the hypothesis that you proposed in this particular research?
Okay, so I'll use it's not an exact quote, but I know I'm paraphrasing really close. Okay, I have a friend who is a chief in the southern half of California. Okay, and he said, if you could convince the average Joe, the citizen, that we do our job to the best of our ability, and our job is this, you have made huge inroads. Because a lot of people don't understand that it's a job and that you guys are doing it. And his argument to me was, the more people that we can get that do work on traffic citation, patrol functions, so on and so forth, the better off we are in the community because you'll go out and you'll make statements. Now the bias from my end of it is I used to be a cop, right? So I'm automatically kind of pushed to one side because I used to wear a blue suit and a tin badge. But law enforcement itself and the people that I've been doing the work for in Florida with the Florida Colonel, and so far everybody has, our job is our job. We have a set of kind of criteria to do our job. We have a set of things that we're supposed to do. And a lot of times that gets lost. When I write a citation, people don't think I'm doing my job. They think I'm writing them a citation when I'm just doing my job. And so far, from the law enforcement community, I haven't had anyone say, no, I think you're completely off base, you're crazy, and this is wrong approach. I think most of it has been, can you show people that what we're doing is what we're supposed to be doing, and this is why you employ us, and this is why we put our life on the line for you on a daily basis, right? And so far that's been a very positive, and it keeps me going, as you guys can tell, right? This is really hard research. I love you guys dearly, but you guys don't like to share information very well, right? Data-wise. And I understand why. I've been there, right? But it's not an easy task to take on. It takes years and years of dedication to, I want to improve the perception of law enforcement, in particular traffic, because I think that's important. I don't think traffic cops are out there to do something mean, evil, or anything else. I think they're out there to do their job. And I think that gets lost in the translation.
Where do you think you're going? Are you going to try to do one then for the state of other states?
I'm going to try to integrate them. I've got, I think, I've got at least 8 states that will give me county level data for county, city, and state enforcement.
That seems to be very valuable. I mean, overall, those are nice trends, but as Ferguson would tell you, there are exceptions.
Right.
And so when you break it down at the county level, maybe you see some things that wouldn't correspond to your findings.
Yeah, what I'd love is everybody to give me all the information that I need, even if it was in aggregate form, right? I would still be happy, right?
Well, I think maybe going off Charlie a little bit, that you've done this average trend analysis. What about an outlier analysis? So are there some counties where there's a whole lot of extra citations going on, and some where a whole lot of, right? And
what drives that?
And what drives that? I mean, that could
So
be
kinda-
where you're not finding anything really interesting on the average. There may be some outliers that might be
So
interesting.
some extreme analysis.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done it. I have the information clearly. I haven't done it. That's a good idea because
Research assistant, qualitative.
no research assistants where I work now. I miss that so much. No PhDs, right? I need my PhD cadre, right? But we're solos because I teach an MBA program, right? And an MBA program has restrictions on it. And I teach only naval officers. So all the guys who come through my system to get their MBA, all are getting paid their full salary while they're there. So we pick up the tab on both sides.
I think your city cop numbers really hit the mark, especially with my agency, because I think that trend of citations going down, I've seen it in, say, the past 15 years where traditionally, say 15 years ago as a new officer, they would say, go out and write some tickets. That was your job. And now we've kind of gone towards data-driven policing, hotspot policing, and it's no longer just go out and randomly write tickets. We want you in these high crime areas because the goal is to reduce crime, period.
Oh, okay.
It seems like with my agency specifically, the goal is not writing tickets, it's reducing violent crimes.
So part of that may just be that the patrol function itself has become dominant,
Absolutely.
right? And that crime rate has become much more critical than whether or not the traffic safety part of it is picked up because other things take priority,
Right, because
right?
my officers used to go out and maybe write 10 tickets a day, now they may write 1 or 2.
Oh, okay.
It's just focused on hotspot policing, target policing.
So that patrol thing, and then I'll get you.
My question was on the sheriff's departments. That was very surprising, looking at the political ramifications in North Carolina. I doubt you guys, and everybody behind me will agree, I'm sure, that the sheriff would have to be near the bottom. And my point, or my question is, what is the criteria for a deputy in Florida? Are they solely appointed like in North Carolina where the sheriff can hire and fire pretty much for no reason?
Yeah.
Or is it,
Go ahead.
are they covered under like the or the civil service type criteria where they got to have a reason?
I haven't
to hire and
looked.
fire?
Yeah, because the sheriff, we definitely distinguish in Florida as a sheriff function, right? Which tends to be, in essence, right, corrections, right, the county jail, and unincorporated patrol and traffic enforcement. But I don't know, because the sheriff's a political appointee, right, voted in Florida. I assume in North Carolina similar. I don't know if he has the ability to hire and fire, or if they're under civil service.
They are.
They're employees, not appointees.
Okay. There you go. There's your answer.
But here, you know, it's happened, it's not common, but in smaller sheriff's department, a new sheriff just fired everyone. No, it was a Democrat, they were Republican. You know, I mean, literally, they're
Literally let the whole staff go.
Yeah, I've experienced
Some of those negative things too, huh?
the next.
It's always a nervous time when elections coming up.
Oh yeah, but in Florida, I've never heard of it, so now we know why, right? Because in Florida they can't do that, so they probably have some protection. And it sounds like in North Carolina there's no protection.
Absolutely not.
So how would I ever control for that in a fixed effects regression?
And a lot of them don't.
That ain't gonna be easy.
A lot of the sheriff's offices here don't have any sort of traffic units. A lot sparked up 5-10 years ago when the state started getting a lot of grants out. They started developing them in order to get manpower. That's, you know.
Oh,
they would pay
okay.
for the salaries, the cars, the equipment. But a lot of them, like in my county, the previous sheriff came in and did away with that, you know, wasn't politically, you know, and now the new sheriff's come in, he's decided to sort of institute it, but, you know, even I was at one time I work for Highway Patrol now, but I was a deputy before, but I was a part of that traffic unit when it first came. Then it went away, I was gone after that, and then now it's kind of coming back. But even when I was there, the sheriff kind of put some parameters there when he, you know, when not to write one, you know, because he's got to get elected. So.
Oh, yeah, so that's definitely different than Florida's system, different than probably a lot of states, right? In that respect, right? Like I know LA County sheriff is clearly elected, but his authority over the deputies in general is very high level. He can't just walk in and terminate, what are there, 28,000 cops in LASO or something. You know, you couldn't come in there and just, well, I'm cleaning house today, I'm going to start anew. That's not going to work out too well with you, is my guess. But in some of these, so you're talking about relatively small community then, that can.
For the most part, I mean, I doubt that kind of thing happens as much in a Mecklenburg County or a
Bigger,
County
yeah.
or Durham or Raleigh area, but you know, as a whole in North Carolina, I think it's probably pretty close.
It could happen. Wow. Yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah.
So I was listening to this gentleman here talking about the time that's spent on things. I find myself increasingly frustrated by the system of rules and accountability that we have here at this wonderful institution. And so I wonder about that in terms of accountability and reporting. How much time do you spend record keeping and doing that kind of thing? Has that increased in recent years? Is that something that maybe limits the amount of time that's available to do patrolling and issuing citations and that kind of thing? And then the other thing, I'm just trying to think about timelines
Sure.
and stuff. With the advent of more and more dash cams and that kind of thing, and patrol cars have any effect on whether or not you're pulling people over? I mean, again, but that's all accountability, you know, it's all out there.
Yeah, because a lot different than when I was a cop. We had this little antenna in the back that told whoever was sitting watch commander where the car was, right? And we, of course, figured out how to make that thing work a little differently, right? We're not fools either, right? Now, with GPS, the phone, I assume you guys are, in general, laptop driven. We were MDT. This will date me, right? We were MDT driven. But, yeah, so I don't know how much time do you guys spend? Would you say, on average, given a shift, I'm a 10-hour shifter coming off of a police department. I don't know, you guys are probably 8, somewhere between 8 and 10. How much time goes to paperwork, so to speak? Half? 3/4?
On the jurisdiction.
Okay, how big?
I've worked for small departments where we had nothing to do but work traffic all day. And I work for a department now where you have zero free time. You go from call to call to call.
Oh, okay.
So that's a tough one.
Yeah, because how busy the operation is, right? Was one of the reasons at Mesa we civilianized all that, cold calls. All the cold calls went to civilian paper writers and away from law enforcement because it's expensive, one. And two, can't stop the burg that already happened. Charlie.
A fun story for folks. I've driven for 55 years and I've had 3 tickets in my life. 2 for speeding. One time I was driving the mirror of Grand Rapids car, and it was just a fancy car. Next thing I know, it was 14 over. But I did get I ran a red light in San Diego to the conference. You've never been to the airport there. It's pretty confusing.
Yeah.
Right into town.
Lambert Field.
And so I got the ticket, and I just didn't even look at it. Threw it away. I figured, I'm over here. They're not going to get me.
Hey, the truth comes out, right?
Then, about 3 months later, I get another ticket, and I look at it, and it's for $500.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I work with city managers and so forth, and surely this is, an error. So I called the manager's office, and then they refer me to some sergeant from the PD, and he said, look, we turned this over to bill collectors. We don't have anything to do with this. So I called the bill collector, and he basically said, you are screwed. He said, A, it could affect my credit rating, and B, that they could take the driver's license away, which isn't true, but I guess it could affect my credit rating. So anyway, I wrote him a check for $500 for going through that red light. They've since changed the law because those rates were a bit high, but it doesn't make you feel good that I paid $500.
Well, but there was a choice made during this time, right? I got a ticket for running a red light. I wadded up and threw in the chest. Well, you know, maybe choices have consequences, right?
It might have been a smart idea to look at that.
And it very well may have said at the bottom, pay this fee, right? For, was it San Diego City that wrote it? Or airport? Airport cops or?
No, it's a city.
Yeah, so the city usually will put down, here's how much the maximum fine is. You can pay that, and that's up to you, right? But that is classic. I've had people with parkers come to me and say, well, yeah, but I have all these parking tickets. Why are they suspending my license? Well, how many do you have? I had one guy with 214. Well, they probably think that if they take your license away, you'll pay the bill. I mean, that would be my assumption. But, you know, a student with 214 parkers, well, you know, probably 214 is too many, right? Probably over 2 was too many. But it is, you know, the war stories happen, right? And you kind of got to go with them. Any other questions, guys? Well, thank you very much, one, for inviting me, and for being such a great audience. I really appreciate it.